Welcome to Team DataFam Tableau User Group meeting number 27. So we're getting up there on the numbers. This tug's a little bit different to a few other tugs. We cater for the presenter, so we meet when the presenter is available. Gives us access to a lot of good content from around the world. Check the schedule on the User Group Tableau website, but we've got quite a few TC presentations coming up over the next few months. And obviously today we've got a Vizit Sydney presentation. So if you weren't at Vizit Sydney at the beginning of June, this is probably why you're here or why you're watching the recording on YouTube as well. Our meetings are held fairly often, but if you would like to present anything, please get in touch. My email is team.datafam@gmail.com. But today we have Dr. Marco Motta presenting From Data to Dialogue, Embracing the Art of Storytelling in Tableau. This was a repeat of Vizit Sydney, obviously, and it's an awesome presentation. So Marco, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks for that. And thanks for everyone who has made the time this morning to come. I think it's always great. Hopefully people, like I said, people that weren't able to get to my presentation at Vizit will be able to listen to it today and let me know what they think. I think it's this presentation is probably the start of something that I'm actually quite enjoying at the moment in terms of trying and mix a little bit of my philosophy training with data visualization. I've actually started writing more papers on ethics of AI as well, which I think I always try to be a little bit kind of like to be provocative in the sense of trying to figure out a way to think about things in a different way. And hopefully, even if you don't have to agree, and that's part of philosophy as well. You're welcome to think differently and to ask different questions. But I think the point is to begin difficult conversations about things that often we take for granted. And I think that's really kind of the aim of this presentation today, hopefully. So, Chris, do you want me to step right in and we take questions later, or what's the format?
You run it how you want to run it. So I'm happy either way.
Sounds good. How about, yeah.
Everyone's a presenter. They can unmute when you ask them to, basically.
Oh, and if you want to heckle, by all means, please do. I haven't been in a philosophy kind of presentation or seminar where people heckled in a long time, so that'd be great. But I'm going to step right in and start talking, and then we'll see how we go. At my Vizit presentation, I did something a little bit more controversial as well. I actually made Alex put on all my slide deck to then have a black slide for the whole presentation, so that you had to listen to me speak and focus on that. In this one, I've been a little bit more kind, and there's some pictures for the different kind of sections. Hopefully the pictures are nice, but the main point of this presentation is really listening. It's more of a story, but it's also more of a kind of traditional philosophy kind of presentation, where it is more about the discourse and hopefully the dialogue as well with all of you. So I want to start by challenging something a little fundamental about the way in which we think about data and truth. And I want to start with this question. What if the thing we've been chasing in data and analytics, which I think for many people is kind of pure objectivity, is the idea that we can grasp some objective reality using data? What if this is just not impossible, but fundamentally misunderstands the nature of reality itself? And this idea that there is a fundamental objective reality out there it's a very ancient dream. It goes back to Plato in the 4th century, who imagined that somewhere beyond our messy subjective world of shadows and appearances, as he calls them, there exists a realm of perfect forms that is pure, that is eternal, that is that has objective truths that are just waiting to be discovered by our rational mind. And this Plato actually makes a point that we actually come from this realm of ideas, and then we're kind of just we're degraded to a certain extent to this reality, and the point of philosophy and wisdom is to kind of go back and trying to remember, as he says, this reality, the objective reality of which our world is just a shadow, it's an appearance. But here's the thing: this dream, this dream has been shattered. Plato's dream has been shattered over a century ago, by philosophers and then also by physicists, and yet somehow in the world of data we're still somewhat chasing it. And the unraveling, I think, started with Descartes in the 17th century. I don't know if you know about Descartes. You probably heard the old cogito ergo sum, saying that I think, therefore I am. But Descartes, basically, at the core of Descartes' philosophy, Descartes tried to doubt everything until he found something that was absolutely certain, which was as he thought about, as he doubted, he could not doubt of the fact that he was doubting, that there was something that was doubting. So he was something that was doubting in the act of doubting. It sounds pretty preposterous, but in reality, is quite an interesting foundation for truths, in some form of truth. I would call it performative truth. What he discovered in this sense was a little bit unsettling, however, that while you subjectively can have this this certainty that you exist, without the guarantee of something external that Descartes said it would be God's existence, all that remained was basically the only certainty of my subjective experience, the I think, therefore I am. And so the objective world suddenly less certain than our subjective encounter with it. Then came Edmund Husserl in the 1900s. Edmund Husserl actually, his main book was called Cartesian Meditations after Descartes, and he launched into what he called phenomenology. Husserl didn't argue that he actually didn't argue that objective reality doesn't exist. Instead, he made a more profound claim, that is, the only reality we ever actually encounter is the reality that appears to us within what he called the phenomenological space, which is the space where us, or the subject, and the object, like let's say a chair or a laptop or whatever it is that you got in front of you, meet and interact. There is no meaningful distinction in this sense between the world and the world as experienced. And then one of Husserl's students, Martin Heidegger, took this even further. For him, we don't actually encounter a neutral world that we then interpret. We're actually already, like the world, we're actually already always thrown into a world that is pre-understood by us and pre-interpreted. When you walk into a room, you don't really first see, or at least Heidegger thinks, that we don't see a neutral, like a bunch of neutral objects that we then interpret. In fact, we immediately see, for example, a door that we need to open, a chair where we sit in, a dashboard to analyze, because we actually come into like the way that we encounter these things, it's already within our pre-understanding of reality. Without that, we wouldn't even be able to interact with the world. And so the world comes already disclosed to us, always already meaningful within our projects and concerns. So in the way that you're thinking about reality is already the way that reality shows up for yourself. And another student of Husserl, Hans-Georg Gadamer, another German philosopher, extended this insight even further. And he says, interpretation in this sense, like the fact that we interpret the world to understand it, isn't a distortion as Plato would think. Isn't that there's something out there that we interpret and therefore, we kind of degrade it to our level. Interpretation is, in fact, it's not a distortion of that we bring to pure facts. Interpretation is the very medium through which anything becomes meaningful at all. And so understanding isn't something we add to reality. Our understanding is the way that reality shows up for us. And so every encounter with truth or truths require this dance between subject and object, this interpretative dialogue. And meanwhile, physics was also discovering something remarkably similar. I don't want to kind of like, I'm not a physicist. I'm just interested. So by all means, I'll probably, if there's anyone that understands this better than I do, feel free to interject. But my understanding of this, at least from a purely philosophical perspective, is that, if you go back in the 17th century, you had Newton and his classical mechanics that had given us a universe where there is absolute space, absolute time, and objects with definite properties like mass and motion, which are independent of any observation. Like the observations do exist, but we are observing something, and we're observing it in the way that it is. So you can observe the motion of planets, and you can describe it using mathematics and understanding exactly what is happening there. But then Einstein came along, and suddenly space and time became relative. He flipped the script and made space and time relative to the observer's frame of reference. This was not just a trick. This was actually a way in which, if you like, to Einstein's point, the theory of relativity, by doing that, you actually make reality more understandable. You actually explain a bunch of things that Newtonian physics could not explain. And so for Einstein, once you do that, there is no longer, from a philosophical standpoint, you can start to see that there is no longer a universal now, and there is no absolute perspective from which to view events objectively. Every event exists in its own right, but it's also like the way that we describe it depends on the frame of reference of the person experiencing it. And again, one step further to this, quantum mechanics actually goes quite a bit further to this intuition. Heisenberg showed in his uncertainty principle that we actually can't know both the position and the momentum of a particle simultaneously. So two of the properties that Newton took for granted in a body, at a particle level, we can no longer describe both at the same time with absolute precision. The act of observation, he found, fundamentally affects what it is observed. The particle doesn't have, in that sense, a definite properties that are waiting to be discovered. Those properties actually exist. We could say, some physicists say that those properties exist in superposition until the moment that our measurement brings those specific properties into being. But in that sense, you can start to see already how these two things are interacting. Like, those properties, do they even exist before we actually interact with the particle? And does the particle have a specific reality before we actually engage with it? And so or is the reality the space of that engagement? So all of this, and I apologize for the kind of very, very quick brushstroke across, a few hundred years of philosophy and science. But I think this is really interesting because in our data practice, we are still somehow operating as if we're doing classical mechanics, as if data exists out there with properties that are independent from the way that we collect it, the way that we process it, and the way that we interpret it. And so this is where, to me, storytelling entered the pictures. And I use storytelling to kind of, I use the concept of storytelling a lot, but I think it's to do a couple of things. It is really about bringing the human in the picture of how data is both collected and represented. And I'm sure that everyone may have a different interpretation of what data storytelling means, but I think to me it has a connection with the way that we understand data, not as decoration. There's not a story on top of the data, but it's actually a fundamental way. Storytelling is this fundamental way for humans to make sense of reality. In fact, one of the books that I really that I recently read, not so recently anymore, but I really enjoyed, is the book *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. I would suggest that if you haven't read it, you go and read it. It actually, there's a bunch of ideas in there, but the main idea is that our species, like the Homo sapiens species superpower, and why we're so successful, like from an evolutionary standpoint, it's not so much that we're smarter, it's not so much that we have language, it's not so much that we have, all those kind of skills, because in reality, when in the animal kingdom, you can see that there's a lot of other animals that are quite more skilled than we are, and a bunch of those things. Even monkeys have got better memories than we do, for example. But for Harari, our superpower and what made us so successful as a species is our ability to create shared stories, to create shared ideas that unite us around a common purpose. And in fact, he says that because of that, our success wasn't so much our success was that we were able to compare to a lot of pretty much every other mammals, and maybe the only ones that maybe can do just as well as we do are ants and bees. We can actually create very large groups, and we can control and hold together very, very large groups of individuals. And the reason why we can do that is because of storytelling, is because we are able to create stories and ideas that can be shaped, and that can actually end up in everyone's minds, and everyone can use those as a goal to achieve something together. And I often this idea is quite powerful, and I think in this sense, stories aren't just a social tool, but in the sense they actually do create a reality. And so that's why I say they're not just social tools; they're also epistemological tools. They're tools to understand reality in a way that how we structure meaning itself. Ideas like, I always make this example. Like, if you think about ideas like money is such or the economy. These are ideas that don't really have any foundation in reality. Those are ideas that humans created. If tomorrow we all decided that we stopped giving money any value, that money wouldn't have any value beyond the paper is printed on. But somehow that idea is actually allows the human race to somehow interact together in the pursuit of economic betterment, and sometimes that pursuit obviously doesn't turn out very well when greed gets involved. But you can see the point. Like, today, our very connected and global world is based on this idea that we all share, that money has a value, that the economy is important. And so that, to me, that's quite a strong example of how this global connected world has allowed to have things like AI or computers or very complex things that we wouldn't have been able to create in even in a group of 200 or 300 or 1,000 people. So in this sense, these stories are really important. And as I was saying, that they are epistemological tools, not just social tools. They actually shape the way that we structure meaning. Think about a hammer, and a hammer is Heidegger's favorite example. A hammer isn't just an objective collection of wood and metal. It's real to a carpenter in a completely different way that it is real to a historian studying medieval tools. Like, the hammer's reality is always mediated by our projects, by the stories that we tell ourselves, and also by what matters to us and why. So data works the same way. It's never just raw information waiting to be discovered. It's always already interpreted somehow through our questions, through our categories, our assumptions about what's worth measuring and why. And let me now kind of take this a little bit closer to the work that we do in Tableau. I think at this point it's all being quite theoretical, but I think this has real implications for some of the things that we do as working with Tableau, or in general working with data and data visualization. In a way, if you really believe what I've just said so far, then every choice you make when creating visualization is a storytelling choice. When you select which data to include, which variables to plot, which colors to use, which time period to focus on, you're not just revealing the data, you are participating in a dialogue with it. You're crafting a narrative. That bar chart that you created, it doesn't just show sales figures. It tells a story about what counts as success, what time periods matter, which comparisons are meaningful and which comparisons are not meaningful because you haven't included them. That dashboard that you design embodies a theory of what information leads, a theory about what kind of information leads to good decisions and which kind of information doesn't lead to good decision, how that information should be structured. And in this sense, this isn't a bug about data visualization. And I think often, we think, I've heard this so many times, to let the data speak for itself. But this is, I contend that this is actually not possible. This isn't a bug of data visualization where we're like a little bit too involved in the data. This is exactly what data visualization is. It's interpretation made visible. It's storytelling through data. And even if the story is not like a specific story, and I think often we have this debate even, among people that are, present here today or people in the DataFam, some dashboards are not storytelling dashboards in the sense that they're not purposefully telling a story, but somehow in the act of visualizing, there is, you're bringing in some biases and some stories in it that you can't avoid but bringing in it. There's already a pre-understanding of the way that you are, in the way that you are actually addressing and approaching and making some choices in your dashboard that I think would, and that's kind of my contention at the end, that you actually want to bring some of these to consciousness as opposed to pretending that that's not the case. And I think in this sense, this is liberating and it's not limiting, because it means that every Tableau dashboard is an invitation, not just to try and uncover something real about the data, but it's also an invitation to enter in a dialogue with the data. Every visualization is a conversation starter in that sense, is not a conversation ender. So what does it mean for us, data analysts and storytellers? It means that, in a way, or at least for me, it means that we need to stop trying to eliminate ourselves from our analysis and instead embrace our role as interpreters and narrators of that data. The goal isn't to step back and let the data speak for itself, as I said. Data never speaks for itself, just the same as objects, and never, like a particle in a way, it's never itself until someone's going to send a photon to figure out where the particle is, and then all of a sudden you bumped into a particle and you stopped its momentum. Data only speaks to our questions. It only speaks to our visualization, to our interpretations. Instead, the goal for me is not to let data speak for itself, is to be radically open to what the data might be trying to tell us, to let it surprise us, to let it challenge our perception, providing that resistance through its otherness, and therefore creating dialogue, like words that are in between these two poles. I think I want to stress this point, because I think the point that I'm trying to make is not that, if a tree falls in the forest, nobody hears it. The point is that when you're thinking about how we understand reality, we don't, we are part of that. It's not that, I imagine the whole reality and I make up reality as I'm not the creator of reality. It's clear to me that there is a resistance that the outside world is kind of posing to my understanding. And so I'm not making up reality. It's not my dream, but somehow it's also not my dream. There is a level in which whatever it's out there creates some resistance to the way that I perceive it. And so in doing so, when we're talking about reality, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we're no longer talking about this out there thing that I cannot perceive. We're actually now bringing that into the conversation. What is real is not something that's out there that I can never quite get to. Something in itself. Reality is the dialogue between me and the data, is about, hitting that resistance with my understanding and somehow coming to terms with that and creating something, creating an understanding out of that. So that is what the phenomenological space is. The phenomenological space is where you and your data meet. It's not a limitation to overcome. It's actually the place where reality is born. That's where all the interesting discoveries happen. When you're open to be surprised, when you're willing to let the data challenge your mental models, when you treat analysis as dialogue rather than extraction, that's when data becomes truly, truly powerful. This is, I think, what the Tableau community understands intuitively. I don't think I'm telling you things that are completely foreign to you. The best dashboards aren't just displays of information. They're not, here is all the data I had and I, put it in a dashboard. They're actually, ways of starting the conversation. They're way of creating a space or spaces where teams can gather around and can gather around and actually ask questions, where insights can emerge through collective interpretation, and where data becomes a medium for collaborative sense making. And again, arcing back to the point of Harari, that point is really that, as you create this reality, as the data supports the creation of these new ideas, you're actually creating shared purpose and common goals that you can then kind of rally behind. Because ultimately, data storytelling isn't a solo performance, and I think that's actually something that's quite important to me. Data storytelling and data in general, data visualization, it's a community practice. Just as Gadamer shows us that understanding always happens through dialogue, through this interpretation that where we dialogue with the thing that we're trying to interpret. The most powerful data stories actually emerge from multiple perspectives while they're engaging with the same information, when different interpreters bring their own questions and insight to bear into the discussion. And so the Tableau communities, to me, embodies those principles. Every visualization shared, every technique explored, every interpretation that it's offered contributes to our collective understanding. We're not just sharing dashboards, we're sharing ways of seeing, ways of asking questions, ways of making meanings out of complexity. And so I want to leave you with this challenge. I don't know. I hope that this is something that resonates with you. And it's a challenge that I also pose to myself. I would like to stop trying to eliminate myself, and so from my data analysis. Instead, let's bring ourselves more fully into the data analysis. Let's be open to be surprised. Let the data challenge us and reshape our understanding. Embrace interpretation in a way that most objective things, in a way, that is the most objective thing you can do. That is to be genuine, to be genuinely objective is to be genuinely subjective. It's to engage so honestly with the data that it can show you something that is other than what you expected. And in this sense, truth isn't discovered by stepping back from our humanity, from stepping back from us and letting the data speak for itself. Truth is actually creating through our honest engagement. And if phenomenology has taught us anything, is this, that truth is creating through this honest engagement with reality as it responds to our questions. The space between you and your data, the space between me and my data, between the story and the audience, that's where that dialogue lives. And so that's where, to me, the real magic of data storytelling happens. Thank you.
Contact details, or I've got a slide for that as well.
Sorry, I actually killed my presentation in the meantime. I'll put the contact details back up in a sec.
Thank you, Marco.
No worries. Any questions? I know it's a bit. Oh, there you go.
So always challenging text, Marco. Always get us thinking outside the box. Love it.
I think it's really relevant, because I'm just thinking about, I'm in the business of HR data, and depending on the metric and depending on the dimensions you want to bring in to slice that metric is the kind of stories that you may get. Or you don't bring a dimension of, whatever dimension you want to bring in, whether the person is, a parent, or whether how long they've been with the organization, or, there's so many different dimensions you could bring in that could bring the story. Or if you don't bring that dimension, and you just won't get the story. It's like, I really appreciate the realization of how subjective we are and how subjective our data is because of the way that we're choosing to observe it. I just think that's really powerful. And it's really nice to take a step back and kind of at that meta view and just kind of say, okay, this is really where we are, and then be deliberate about those subjective choices.
Yeah, and I think that's, thanks, Sam. I think that is the point. I think the point is that even the most objective dashboard has made some choices, and those choices have been made by someone. And it's not like, oh, he kind of, he was almost objective, however he forgot this little thing. It was like, well, yeah, there isn't a way to make that objective dashboard, and chasing that is actually counterproductive in my mind. That was the point that I was trying to make, that in fact the idea that reality is something to be discovered, it's almost like we could talk about this for hours. It's almost got a colonial kind of flavor to it as well. The idea that we humans are going out there, discovering what's really true about this thing, and whatever's there, it wasn't really true. It's quite interesting. At the same time, the interesting point is also that whether we understand that or not, consciously, the whole idea that there is an objective reality relies on religion quite a lot. And if like the modern world, and I'm religious myself, but it's like in the modern world, if you actually rejected some of that idea that there is something out there that grounds everything, you can't have it both ways. Like, you can't have your cake where there is no God or there is no kind of underlying meaning, and eat it too and say, oh, there is actually something out there. There isn't, that there isn't something objective out there, unless, there is someone who wants you to see something in a specific way, and that is the correct way. But even then, we could discuss about that for a long time in religious terms too. So it's all quite interesting, I think, or at least I find it interesting.
Marco, something that came to mind. Basically, you tell us we should get more involved in our data viz and the data stories as analysts, get more in there. But on the other hand, especially working on public data sets with Tableau Public, for example, we often have in mind that do not harm. Be conscious of bias or cultural differences, using icons, more that kind of stuff, which is that kind of conflict between the two. Get involved, but be conscious. How do you marry the two, where you want to be more involved, but then you have to be conscious of all the bias and then the not harming and not making damage? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I hope that this doesn't come along as to say, this is not meaning that your perspective is the only perspective. That's actually quite the opposite, I think. But I agree that you could take it to say, oh, okay, like that means that all my biases are correct, as that's the way that I see it. And that's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, yes, you will inevitably bring a bunch of biases, and if you're not careful, and I think that's maybe that's something that's happening at the moment. If you're not careful, you're ignoring the resistance that the outside world. So let me put it like this: there's a bit of a idea that you can be the creator of your own reality. That if you think about something hard enough, then you'll make it happen. That there's a kind of like this there's a bunch of kind of funny discussions about that, which I completely disagree with. I think the point is that you bring something to reality just as much as the reality brings something to you. And so the point is that the concepts of, these oppositional concepts is actually the wrong concept. The point is, you got to bring the two things together, and we're still thinking about it in opposition somehow because that's how we've been thinking for hundreds of years. But in fact, the point is that the in-between space is more what's interesting. Now, from that, like you say, you don't want to have you don't want to necessarily bring your biases if your biases are contradicted by the data. So you don't want to impose something on the data that's not there, but somehow you also want to bring yourself in, because it's like, what else are you bringing? It's like you're a human living in the 20th century. If you were living in another era, you would be bringing a whole lot of other set of understanding of things, and so you cannot not bring those to the dialogue. But again, it is a dialogue, so it's not you imposing something or forcing your biases. Is acknowledging that you're coming from a perspective, but that perspective is challenged by the data, and somehow in that dialogue, to me, that something will mean something. That data will come up in a certain way. If Sam did it, it will come up in a different way. And so what's more powerful, I think, about, and this is why it was cool to talk about this as part of the DataFam, is like, actually, I don't need to just think about my perspective. I can have a chat with Sam, and I can have a chat with you, Fred, and I can have a chat with Chris, and we can then figure out how does this work for a few people, and where how do we then construct something that maybe it's a little bit more real than just what I see and what Sam see and what Fred see individually.
I think there's a lot of parallels there with what sort of the skeptical community is kind of talking about at the moment, because back in the day it was very much that Carl Sagan point of view, where if we present the information that the reason that you disagree with me is because you have an information deficit. So if we give you the information, you will come to the correct conclusion, which is of course mine. And we're now seeing that, well, the way that people actually interact with that is quite different than we imagined. That people will not agree just because you give them more information. They're actually more likely to make more excuses and really solidify on what they believed originally. And it's the dialogue that gets through to people. It's that ability to have a chat with people and have them feel like they are being heard in that exchange. So if you put yourself into the interpretation of the data that you are presenting, it's more of a dialogue and less of a I am telling you the facts and you just have to accept it.
I love this, Heather, because I think that's exactly, like, I've made this point in other circumstances where we live in a post-fact world. It's like, because we have so many facts, like we have, like, even compare even to 50 years ago, we always have all the facts. Like, there's no longer a discussion of like, maybe I'm old enough to remember a time where we would have a discussion about whose that song was, and we couldn't settle it in 3 minutes. We would have to go and find the album and figure out, actually, there's two versions. So I think we have never had more facts at our disposal. But to your point, having more facts doesn't mean we have less opinions, and it doesn't mean that we have more, that we can finally settle the discussion about which opinions are right. So I think that actually, I think this, what I'm saying here, it becomes even more relevant, because it isn't about here are the facts, we all look at this like as if we all look at the sun and we all see the same sun. We actually need to have a conversation with each other to understand, what do you mean by sun? Because I mean something and you mean something else. And so it is only in dialogue that we can find reality. as opposed to thinking that it is in searching something out there. Reality is inside of us. No, but that's the point. Like it's in our shared dialogue that we come to an understanding of reality. It's not something that I can come up by myself just looking at things.
But also, maybe that that dialogue needs to include "Don't look at the sun," because that's bad for you.
Yes. There's a very nice Chris Cornell song that says, "Every time I stare into the sun, all I ever get is burnt and blind." Anyway, I digress.
Marco, I wanted to ask you about the new masters of Tableau, the mothership, Salesforce. They are. I was in a session in the San Diego conference last year, and we had a few minutes with the CEO Ryan Ate, and I asked him about storytelling. My opinion is that basically, since Tableau it depends so much, puts so much of its worth on storytelling, shouldn't Tableau invest more in teaching people how to tell stories? And his reply was curious and discouraging, which is that the trouble with stories is that each time a story is told, it's told differently. This is sounds a lot different from what you're saying, and I just wondered, is this new drift at among Tableau, the Tableau management, going to change anything, or you're going to have to flee to another home, or?
I mean, thanks for the question, Ted. And I wasn't aware of what they're talking about. I'm always pretty. How would you say? I don't necessarily trust any corporate machines. It's just me. But I think at the end of the day, like I think we're operating in a situation where these concepts, and I think philosophy is always a little bit ahead of some of the mainstream ideas. Like a lot of mainstream ideas come from philosophy, but they take 200 or 300 years to actually get embedded as mainstream idea. In the meantime, philosophy and science have moved on. People still believe that things like, oh, science is giving us all the truth about the universe, and scientists are confused about how that is even possible, because they didn't know about that. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that Tableau is a good way of telling stories. There are other ways of telling stories, but I think Tableau, especially in the way that is interactive and it creates a bunch of ways of moving through your data. I think it's a very good place to do that data storytelling. But sometimes the data storytelling, and I think I had a couple of chats recently where where I spoke with someone who said, a data story is not even necessarily a dashboard. It may not even have one number. A data story could be a presentation where you say, here is a problem, here is what we found, and here we think, this is the conclusion that we're drawing. Sometimes you might have one number, sometimes you may have no numbers, and you have some reference to some stuff that's happening out there. So I think, yeah, so I don't think I can necessarily answer your question in full, but I think I do hope that, like, I'm not on a mission, but I think I'm lucky to have had a completely different training from probably 95% of people in Tableau, because I've done philosophy for a long time, and then I stepped into data and analytics, and I'm not necessarily I'm not no longer in the philosophy world, but I know enough about that, and that I can bring this into the data analytics community and hopefully make some some contribution to that in my own way. And I think that's also the beauty of the DataFam. Everyone brings their own little bits, and together, we make some more interesting bits.
Yeah. Have you written books or articles or anything about this?
So this paper I've just published as an article on LinkedIn. I can post which is a little bit more expanded. So it's got more kind of references and stuff, more like an academic type of paper. I'm writing another couple of papers on AI ethics, which I think was another subject that's kind of annoying me at the moment, because a lot of people are talking about it without even have a faint understanding of what the complication of what ethics, ethical kind of philosophy discussions have. So yeah, no, I'm writing some stuff. I haven't written a book. Maybe I will one day, but it's one of those things, in the meantime, I need to find some other ways to make money and support myself. But because books don't pay bills. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm interested in bringing to the community, and I think there are other people that have written about this. Kat Greenwood, I think, has a book out there, but everyone kind of brings their own perspective to this. So yeah, hopefully one day I'll post the article link in here anyway.
Okay. Maybe we could talk offline. I publish a weblog that's goes to.
Yeah, I'd love to help.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the link in the meantime, and I'll post it here in the chat.
And then the silence falls across the group. I'll put up Marco's details while we're waiting as well, but LinkedIn or his website. And I think on yours you had.
I tend to be quite active on LinkedIn, so if anyone, if anyone is interested in knowing more, get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'm always, quite often there, talking rubbish most of the time.
At least it's not AI generated posts.
Oh, we have to do what we have to do sometimes. No, but mostly my own words, or my own thoughts, at least.
Yep. So the links are in the chat if people want to grab them as well. We'll move on. The next section is Fast 5. So 5 quick questions, quick answers. Marco hasn't seen the questions before because I made them up yesterday. I'm talking about AI. I didn't make up the questions. AI made up the questions. But again, there's no right or wrong answers. If you want to pass, that's fine. It's just simple questions. I hope they're relevant. So the first question is, what's the first chart type you think of when starting a new dashboard?
Bar chart. Definitely the wrong answer.
No, that was my answer as well. That's it. And how do you feel when someone uses too many filters on a dashboard?
I feel like I want to use a dynamic zone visibility to close them out and have a little menu that pops up.
Yep, best way to handle it. And number 3, have you ever created a dashboard that has completely changed how someone saw the data and what happened?
Okay, this is not going to be a short answer. I'll try to make it as short as I can. Yes, we created a dashboard at Transport and Main Roads where for the first time, we gathered together a whole bunch of data from pretty much everywhere in relation to the investments they were making in infrastructure and trying to understand what benefits it had. I know it sounds super boring, but it actually was quite eye-opening for a lot of people for the first time to see, okay, you spend money here, what happened? And that kind of led me down the path of instead of just putting a dashboard in a while and waiting for people to look at it, to actually create workshops at the end of the dashboard process to gather insights out of the dashboards. So that's often what I end up doing these days. And it's like we created dashboards, but the thing doesn't end there. We then go and do a bunch of workshops with a whole lot of different people that understand the data, but don't have the tools to to manipulate it like we do, and then ask questions. And then often the first reaction is like, oh, those numbers are wrong. That's not the way I see it. I've never seen that number. It's not true. And I call this the 5 stages of grief of data visualization, where people kind of see their data for the first time and have all sorts of reactions about it. But I think that's really, really cool. And in the case of transport and main roads, a lot of that created it's harder to create an impact in the planning from that, but I think what it actually created dialogue between different areas that hadn't talked before, and they figured out, oh, actually, if the pavement is deteriorating, it may have something to do with more trucks going along that particular stretch of road. What can we do to predict where the pavement is going to get broken by asking the trucking, like the people that provide licenses for, or that provide permits for trucks to go on for heavy trucks to go on certain roads, and try and discuss how to kind of move some of those across the network to avoid that. So some of these things had a real world impact, which is quite cool.
Yeah. No, it's always good when they can see data differently for the first time, especially when they're very knowledgeable about their own data anyway. Awesome. Next question. What's the best advice you've ever gotten about data visualization?
I don't know about this one. I think I haven't got this advice from anyone in particular. I think, the idea of telling a story through data, maybe from Makeover Mondays or some of that stuff. I think that's definitely something that, as you can see, stuck with me. I think it's something that the DataFam in general talks about quite a lot, and I think that's probably the best advice in terms of, like, because when I stepped into some of my initial data visualization roles, because there was a lot of engineers around me, they had a completely different approach. They had the approach of, like, let the data speak for itself, put all the data there and see what people make of it, as opposed to actually being an active participant. So I think that really stepped up my game in terms of data visualization, and even the engineers found, oh, actually this is helpful, whereas the stuff that we were doing was not very helpful and everyone complained about it. So yeah, that's probably the best advice, is to not put all the data in the dashboard and actually try and figure out what the story is.
I know. Cool. And the last question is, what's one Tableau feature you think is overrated?
Oh, overrated is hard.
You can pass. It's okay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of underrated ones, like dynamic zone visibility, or maybe dynamic zone visibility is a little bit overrated because we could do it before. I was doing sheet swaps for a long time. Dynamic zone visibility made it marginally better, but it hasn't really changed my life in any significant way. So I'll say dynamic zone visibility.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for that. The next TUG meeting is next week. And again, it's another repeat from Vizit Sydney, but I actually attended this presentation at Vizit. It's a really cool presentation. But Counting Kicks a data story from the womb. Yes, that's exactly what she talks about, but it's actually quite fun and entertaining. So that'll be next week. I think PK was here, or she was here earlier. There she is. I can see her hiding in the crowd. But anyway, this recording and all other recordings from all the other online tugs is on Team DataFam on YouTube. We've just crossed the 5,200 hours of watch time and 1,200 subscribers. That happened almost at the same time. And if it's like today's session, you don't need to watch it on YouTube. You can then listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you've got any questions, or again, if you want to present, please email me at team.datafam@gmail.com. But usually that's the end. Where's Heather? Heather's here. Heather, would you like to make an announcement about your latest project?
Yes. So Steve Wood, Kimberly Scott, and I have been working away in the background, creating a new YouTube channel called Unfinished Business, and it has released the first episode this morning. So we had a chat with Lewis Yu. The point of the channel is to have a look at visualizations that have gotten stuck, things that have not made it to Tableau Public because it didn't work, or we couldn't figure things out, and so we ask a guest to bring us a viz, and we sort of jump into it, have a look at what's going on, and talk through some possible solutions, because everyone gets stuck. Troubleshooting is definitely a skill that we all need to employ from time to time, but we don't talk about it very much. So it's something we wanted to bring to the fore.
I know, great concept. As I said, I skipped through the first recording quite quickly and sort of see what you were doing, but I'll go back and watch it again for sure.
We had a lot of fun, and Lewis has sort of showed me some sneaky peeks of what he has been doing since we recorded this episode, and there's some really cool stuff coming in the viz that he's looking at. So check out the episode, see where he started, and then I think the finished product is going to be all the more amazing for it.
Awesome, no worries, thank you.
Thank you.
And also thank you, Marco, for that presentation today. As I said, I saw it at Vizit. It was awesome. Again, today there was a bit of a different twist. A few more graphics, obviously, but still good to see it again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone who came.
Okay, so if there's no other questions or anything, then that's it. If anyone wants to ask a question,
I did have one other thought that came up when Heather was talking actually about facts and opinions and reality, I guess, truth, and currently, like even this morning I was watching something on Facebook and served me up a reel, and I thought, oh well, that's really cool, and then my second thought was, I don't even know if that's real anymore, and so that whole, we've got all the facts, like all of us, I feel like all of a sudden in the last few months we've lost all the facts, unless it comes from a verified, validated channel. Now I almost have to assume everything is false unless I can prove it's true, or unless somebody else can prove it's true. It's even harder, I think. And in that space, sometimes we've got all this information, it's very easy just to reject it all. Coming back to Heather's point of, if you want to present me with the facts, I can very easily reject them now. And even in our you don't need to do a dashboard, just give the data semantic layer and the AI, where's the truth in that? We're sitting in that junction. It's very, very difficult to let the business users have something like this. We know it's not true. We can tell you why it's not true, but it's very, very difficult to sway that that viewpoint. Any thoughts coming from that?
That's such a good point. It's like, I think I'm always like, again, maybe it's the way that I'm kind of always bent thinking, but it's like, I think about this in the concept of the human history, right? And thinking about what used to happen, 200, 150, years ago. And it's like, I think there is such a step change for us at the moment, where I think we're not really equipped as human beings to deal with that. Our brain is not necessarily equipped to deal with that. It doesn't matter. Also, I would actually put another point to that. It doesn't even matter whether something is false and it's false. Somehow you're still affected by it. Because your brain is just not equipped to deal with the idea that something like that can be really false. And so it doesn't matter that you watch some social media stuff that makes you angry, and that is false, but somehow it still made you angry. And I think that there's something to be said about that. And there's obviously question marks about whether any of this is really. Again, I don't demonize any technology. I think, it's like I always get annoyed when people say, "Oh, it feels like the arguments they're making today about AI, they made them yesterday about Google, they made them before about the internet, they made them before about TV and about cinema and about." So again, you look at this in context, and it's like there's always someone complaining about something. But at the same time, I do wonder whether some of these things, will come up as, some people say, social media will be the cigarettes of the 21st century, and it's like, that maybe there is no way of using this maybe the downsides are outweighing the upsides, and so maybe there isn't really, like, can we even deal with a global world that is like that? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but it's really intriguing to think. I always also think there is a game to be played, and some people will play it better than others, and so in that context, some people will be left behind, just like some people have been left behind by the modern kind of online economy, as some people were left behind by the Industrial Revolution. And so I don't know, like, what do we do? I guess my question is, what are we doing to equip our young people in a lot of cases of, like, the ability to be critical about stuff, the ability to deal with mobile phone addiction. I see how easy it is for my kids to get addicted to that. I think I see how easy it is for me to get addicted to that. How are we working through all of that, and at the same time, working through figuring out how to discern what to look at and what facts are real and what things are not real, and how our brain is affected by that. So sorry, long-winded, but really, really cool, interesting thought. And I think there is no answer. There will be an answer in a while, and I don't know what it is today.
I don't think there's any answer, but I think we can find things that seem right, or they sit with us as part of this discourse, or other things that we know we should question more, and I think that's what's really valuable about dialogue like this. There is no right answer, but I think we just get moments of, oh, I need to be doing this, or I need to be doing less of this, or even just some of those questions you have at work, and where you should use AI or where you really shouldn't use AI. That's going to be really key for us. It's already here, right? It's already here.
Yeah, I think there's a form of anchoring bias that kind of comes into all of these, like, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. This is, you see the thing that makes you terribly angry, but it's fake, but it anchors you at a certain point, and you go, okay, well, I'm about this far back, but it's nowhere near as much. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that fascinates me about behavioral economics and things like that. I was listening to Hannah Fry's audio book this morning on it's called Hello World, and she's talking about the signs that you see in the supermarket that say limit of 12 cans of soup per customer. It's not because they had a run of people going and buying 12 cans of soup, but it means that when you go and buy a soup and you go and you pick up 2 cans, you go, well, if they have to limit people to 12 cans, obviously most people are buying more than I. So they start at 12 and work backwards. And so they've actually shown that it raised the average number of cans purchased per customer from 3 point something to 7 point something, just by.
I think that's happening with eggs. At $20 a carton, I can't buy any more than 2.
You buy 2.
Well, and this is a thing that we've had in South Australia for years. Anytime we had there was a projected fuel shortage, they'd do fuel rationing. And so they tell everybody that if your number plate ended in an odd number, then you had to go and get fuel on this day. And if
I can see where this is going.
That day, and if it was a letter, there's all these other things, all of these rules. And the idea was to restrict the amount of fuel being sold. We never sold more fuel in South Australia than during a week in which there was fuel restrictions. Everything shot through the roof because everyone's like, I can't get it tomorrow, I better get it today. There were people lining up down the streets. You couldn't get down South Road. Ridiculous. So they stopped doing that.
But it's that whole business logic of when you're defining a KPI in a business, similar to that, be careful what you measure
100%.
and also be more careful about how people behave when there's a KPI in place.
100%.
And it's just, you put the wrong KPI in place and it will change behavior sometimes instantly, or when people pick up on, oh, but it means this,
Yeah.
and they'll change it. The same thing. If
Going
you're
back to
Russian,
Marco's point, just by observing it, you have changed the thing just by observing it.
Yep.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is so wacky.
Oh, Ted's having a problem with the sound, but again, it'll be in the recording anyway. You can go back and watch the last few minutes. Just before we go, Harry's had a question that was for Marco. What is your advice to people who want to improve their insights generation skills?
Yeah, I think I have a very simple advice for this, which is go and talk to the people in the business that actually do have an understanding of the data. And often, as an analyst, you don't. And I think recognizing that is really important. As an analyst, you've got really good skills in manipulating the tools, but you don't necessarily have a very deep understanding of the data. You'll have a generic understanding, but then there will be some people that truly understand what's going on with the data. And those are the people that you need to go and talk to. And in my practice, I tend to create workshops for these people because they're the ones that then provide insights, and the insight generation that come from, again, dialogue and talking together. I think it's far superior to the insight generation that you can do for the people can do at their desks. And for as much as obviously after COVID, things became a little bit harder to get everyone into the office or into one space at one given point. I think the more you can do that in person, or at least virtually in person, like with people showing cameras and faces and stuff, that will really be quite strong. Again, it's part of my practice doing the insight workshops. That's what I call them. And you get all the SMEs in a particular area, and even cross areas, because often that where it becomes interesting when they start seeing different things that happen and how both areas are affected by the same data. So yeah, that would be my suggestion. Go out, do workshops, talk to people that know more than you about the business, because as an analyst, you can't ever know enough about the whole business as the people that are working on the ground. But they also don't know the data necessarily very well because they're not able to see it at scale like you are. And so again, dialogue, conversation really is what gets things going most of the time.
Yep, definitely. Awesome. Thank you for your time again. Awesome presentation. It'll be online soon, let's say within 48 hours. And or follow on Twitter or Blue Sky, and you can see those announcements as well.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Okay, have a good day, good night,
Yeah.
wherever
See
you are in
everyone.
the world. Okay, see you.